Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Education is our focus during Week 4 of Capital Outlook. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. Thanks for joining us. This evening, we'll visit with the chairman of the education committees of the Wyoming legislature, that's Senator Hank Coe and Representative David Northrup. And we'll also talk education with Senate President Drew Perkins and Speaker of the House Steve Harshman. Senate Ag Chair Brian Boner will talk about his committee's interim work with the University of Wyoming's College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And we'll meet Senate Majority Floor Leader Dan Dockstader in this week's Capital Outlook profile. Capital Outlook starts now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
By a grant from AARP, serving the needs and providing real possibilities for the over 50 population in Wyoming. AARP Wyoming. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And by Wyoming Humanities, celebrating our heritage, strengthening our democracy, and growing Wyoming's creative and cultural economy for over 50 years. Visit thinkwy.org.
And welcome to Week 4 of Capital Outlook from here in Cheyenne. And as we begin our discussion today, it's going to be all about education with Senator Hank Coe and Representative Dave Northrup, respective chairs of your body's Education Committee. Gentlemen, welcome to Capital Outlook.
Nice to be here.
Good morning.
This will be an interesting interim, I think, to say the least, for education. Start with recalibration. This is something that's mandated, that happens every so often. Most recently, it happened in 2017. You've been down this road many times before. Mm-hmm. What's recalibration going to look like this year? And I think a 30,000-foot question is there more pressure to make education overall less expensive in Wyoming? And are those two things congruent as you look at recalibration?
Well, I think that's definitely the case. I think there's a perception out there that we can create a model that is cheaper. And, you know, we've got a $200 million plus shortfall in the next 2 years in education funding. But recalibration really goes in and with consultants. And we look at, I think it's 37 different components in the K-12 prototypical funding model to make sure that they're cost-based. And to make sure,
which is court mandated,
right? Which is court mandated. That's the key. The court mandate says that the state of Wyoming is obligated to provide a basket of educational goods and services equally throughout the state to afford every kid equal opportunity, no matter where they live, and be cost based. So that the recalibration process, and I did the first one in 2005. I chaired that one, and 10 and 15, and chaired the one in 2017, which. For lack of a better way of saying that, I don't think we really got much out of the one in 2017.
Except that education was going to be a little more expensive. It was one of the things.
About $70 million more out of that model, which we did not adopt. So anyway,
did that happen this interim too? Is that one of the outcomes that's potential here? And if it isn't, why isn't it, Representative Northrup?
Well, it is a potential. You always have an increase in prices, but I don't think it's the flavor of the legislature at this time to be heading in that direction. We would like to at least cut a little bit out of it. There's a couple places that the legislative model does not follow the consultant's model, and we may go to those in an effort to try to trim some of that out.
We've heard often that we haven't sharpened our knives with education yet, that there's more to be cut out of education than we have had the ability to do, and we is the legislature. I think there are many legislators that still believe that. Mm-hmm. Is that the case? And how can we cut what education costs in Wyoming and maintain what most believe is a good educational system?
This recalibration time that we're going to do this time, we'll look again at the market analysis on salaries. It'll look again at a regional cost adjustment. We can't pay teachers the same in Jackson that we pay in Lusk. I say we fund the districts with the block grants. So I look at this recalibration effort, and there are those that think that we're going to get a cheaper model. I don't really believe that, but there is a perception still in the legislature in places, not everywhere, that we fund education at a too high of a level. And a good example of that is that last night on the floor, late, well, not that late, 6 o'clock, something like that, House Bill 46 went down, which would have taken the cap off
Special
of
ed
special
funding.
ed funding.
Right.
And it went down big.
Saving the state about $10 million is the estimate.
Yeah, about 10. And, you know, it was a joint education bill from the interim, and, you know, we took the cap off thinking that actually special ed was so significant and so important that we had to continue to fund it well. And we've looked at efficiencies in special ed and discovered that they're pretty efficient. They share resources, they do a lot of things well.
And here's a couple comments that you heard yesterday in that testimony. Senator Hicks, very few districts in Wyoming follow the model. They have tremendous discretion. Senator Bebout, it's time for a serious discussion on the amount we spend on K-12 education. What does that mean to you?
I guess I would say that we have done a very good job in education of educating kids. If you look at NAEP scores, if you look at some of the other things that are out there, we're right up there with New Hampshire and other states that have got great scores in education. We have great scores in education. I don't know where we're going to make cuts in education. There's a few places we can get a few, but to make a serious cut that will save $200 million, I'm not seeing where we're going to do that and stay competitive with wages, stay competitive with making people want to stay here. If you're living in Evanston and you're making $46,000 a year starting wage, and you go across the border into Utah and they're paying $54,000 a year starting wage, you're probably going to move.
And as we read it in at least Rock Springs and Sweetwater County earlier, and I'm sure maybe in other counties, recruiting teachers is now an issue in the state. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. You know, that's the testimony we had, particularly in southwest Wyoming, you know, up where the co-chair and I live, up in Park County. You know, we're close to Montana, and we get openings up there, and we still have a lot of.
And we poach out of Montana. We get,
yeah, poaching is a good word. We poach out of Montana.
Well, we get quite a few good teachers out of Montana just because we're so close to it, and there's such a wage disparity between Montana and Wyoming. But we're not seeing that in the other directions. That's about the only direction we have that we can go to.
So here we go with the basket of goods discussion. What is offered to students as they matriculate through K-12 in Wyoming? There's been some discussion of this new term, this modern basket is what we need to think about. And now the discussion becomes, when should we really look at the basket of goods? And there's testimony you both heard in committee this week about whether or not that's necessary. And the superintendent of public instruction made the claim that we're not preparing maybe students for college, for the military, and for trades like we need to do. Yet you talk about our great NAEP scores, that we have one of the great education systems in the country. Mm-hmm. Where's the rub there?
Well, the basket, you know, we've made adjustments in the basket. In 2018, we took keyboarding out, put computational thinking in. We took applied technology out completely. We added computer science, and which I think is one of the greatest things we've ever done. I don't know where you go into the basket really and change much. You know, you got science, you got language arts, you got all this stuff, common core skills and knowledge. You know, it's quite a list. And you know, we are going to look at it, but not at the. I mean, just the way the Senate version is going to be, we aren't going to look at it at the extent that I think that the superintendent and others wanted with the Special Advisory Committee. I just don't believe in that.
Yeah, and there was discussion about who should look at that. Should a committee do that and then report of students, industry, business leaders, et cetera? Or should the legislature hear that directly, that testimony directly?
And I've argued that in the House, and I argued that in before the Senate when they were working the bill, that the House of Representatives represents the people. And so if we don't hear it, if our committee doesn't hear some of these comments that are coming in, how do we, when we go to the floor and we become the experts on education? And it's a tough subject. I mean, it's a bigger subject than most people realize to get their hands around and to understand. But if we go to the floor and we don't understand what's being said, it's very difficult for the education committee members to make the rest of the committee members understand what we're talking about. And so you have to have a firm understanding. You have to be able to enunciate and be able to tell people exactly what the words are, the acronyms. We use so many acronyms in education that we just have to be better versed in it. And that's where I was coming from with let the education committee take that testimony and let us work it.
We do have an amendment. Well, we did adopt Concept 1 amendment, which will be on, the recal bill, House Bill 40 is up today. I'll be carrying that on the floor. And Concept 1, we amended that a little bit that said that, the Joint Education Committee will continue to do its work in the interim. We'll have interim topics to look at. So we'll have a select committee on recalibration, which will be a totally separate committee. And the amendment says that the select committee will examine and work in tandem with the Joint Education Committee to actually have a peek at the basket. So
Some people thought that it couldn't be done in 4 months, that it's a much broader topic. Do you both subscribe to that theory?
I do. I would like to hear what the goals are. I've never heard anything except we're going to get an advisory committee together and quite blatantly hire a consultant and spend some money and
$80,000 or so, I think, was the note
and
there.
make it look like we're going to get a good look at this picture. And 4 months is very hard. The advisory committee that they modeled after was the one in accountability, and accountability went on for 7 years. And so that advisory committee understood education very well.
Is realigning the basket an attempt just to make education less expensive, and is that the reason why there's pressures that you've both felt to realign or to re-examine the basket of goods?
Well, I think there's definitely a perception that we could realign the basket or modernize or have a modern basket.
I don't know what that means.
And maybe
Do you guys know what that means? I'm very serious about that
I
question.
really don't. I'm still trying to figure it out.
And I've kept on asking, what does it mean to modernize? What are your goals? What do you hope to gain from this? And I've never got a clear answer. So what do you want to take out? We want to add 1 more year of math. I really think that the math that we need to add is probably
And that's been looked at in prior sessions.
math for living. I mean, we need to put on something that just is living skills, computating interest, looking at all balancing checkbooks, thinking about what your payments are going to be when you buy a car or a house, and try to get that living skills math involved in it instead of maybe calculus. But
There is a perception, though, that we can look at the basket and potentially save money. That's out there.
it's there.
So,
Bottom line, as we wrap up our discussion, and we could talk about this all day long, are we meeting the needs for students to have success in college, work, or the military? Is Wyoming's education system today doing that?
well, I think it is. We've made great strides, I think, and, particularly with NAEP scores, that's National Assessment Educational Progress, that we compare with every kid in the country from every state. At that point in time, we've made significant progress with that. Gosh, I think our school systems, turn out great kids. We have the Hathaway Scholarship, which no other states really have anything quite as good as that. Requires kids to take a success curriculum when they start at 9th grade, 4 years of English, math, social studies, and science, and to qualify. And all of this stuff interacts with National Board Teacher Certification. I think is part of a lot of our success. I happen to believe strongly in that program.
Been some challenges to that as well.
Challenges to that as well, and I think our school systems are. I mean, I can tell you we get some kids up in my country that show up that come from other places because we have move-ins, and over and above special ed kids, we have families moving into Park County just because of special ed, but they say there's no question that the schools in Wyoming are better than where they came from.
Meeting the need, Mr. Chairman?
Meeting the need, we're meeting the need in most cases. Everybody has something that falls through the cracks, but I would go back and say that that the House and the Senate are very good, the legislature, about adding things to the basket, and we have a hard time taking out. I understand there was a Senate Journal 1 to add firearm safety, and while it's optional, you'll have to tell me a district that does not feel that they have to do that now that that's a mandate from the state. So now we got PE being taught gun safety, which is great as far as I'm concerned. But once again, it's one more thing that's been thrown into the basket, even though it's not officially in the basket. It is just another add-on. So at some time, we have to start pulling back a little bit. Maybe knowledge is kind of like a legislator's knowledge. We're an inch thick and a mile wide, and we need to be 10 foot wide and 100 feet thick. And so,
Is this state going to be able to continue to fund education?
Well, I think we have to look at, there's a real downside to how the school foundation program is funded compared to, for instance, general fund is all different. General fund is all sales tax, severance tax, and investment income. 55 to 60% of the school foundation program is funded with local ad valorem taxes. We all pay the 25, 12, and 6 mills. And with the decline in assessed valuation and mineral production, those local mills aren't doing as much as they used to. So that's the downside to how we're going to fund education. The future's grim when you look at it.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, you have the last word. Is this state going to be able to continue to fund what most believe is a solid education in K-12 program?
Well, we're kind of mandated by the courts to do a better job, and the Constitution to do a good job, and so we will probably make some cuts, but I don't see that we're going to make very many severe cuts, and I'm not sure we'll make $200,000 or $200 million worth of cuts into the program. So districts always have the ability to, since it's a block grant, they have the ability to move that money however they want to. They can raise their wages up to be competitive. They can take away from other places. They can make it work within the model. But since it's a block grant, they can do what they want. I don't know how much money they're going to get in their block grant. That'll be the question.
And the last question is there anything you need to hear from your constituents between now and the interim in this process that you haven't heard? Or are you getting the concerns expressed to you, I guess would be the best way as we're speaking now?
Yeah, there's no question constituents really communicate well. I mean, I don't know how many emails you get a day, but I probably get 150, maybe 200 emails
Education
a day on different
is
issues.
a great
all issues.
proportion of that?
Education is a part of that,
Yeah.
but not so much. I think they know. I think our constituents know that we have quite a shortfall in funding, and that we're having a difficult time trying to figure out how to address it. And it's I get my input in the interim before I come down here.
You both are in a very conservative part of Wyoming. You certainly have that pressure to keep taxes low, and yet you have these pressures of funding education as the Constitution and the courts mandate.
Park County has an arm around education pretty strongly. If you look at it, with David and I both living about 15 miles apart.
Yep. Well, to both of you, best wishes in the interim. It'll be very interesting for us to follow how this process goes along, and you certainly are right in the middle of it. Best wishes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us today on Capital Outlook.
My pleasure.
Up next is our weekly visit with the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. We'll talk about education, among other things. Stay with us. And we continue on in week 4 of Capital Outlook with our weekly conversation with the leadership of the Wyoming Legislature, the Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman, and President of the Senate, Drew Perkins. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for taking time in this busy time with the legislature, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, maybe.
I just hope it's not a train.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to me like it is. And we'll start with the budget negotiations that are ongoing now. We're filming this on Thursday morning. And Mr. President, as you concluded work in the Senate last night, you said you'd like a budget agreement by 5 p.m. Thursday, or work tomorrow. How are things coming?
As far I don't know. There was some more exchange between the various appropriations committees yesterday. I think they're meeting at 8 o'clock this morning. So I'm hopeful. It's just we've the budget's been out. It'll be 2 weeks tomorrow. We'll have completed the budget. So we've been negotiating for a couple of weeks. We're down to some items, but they're significant items. Both the House and the Senate have different feelings about certain things that are in the budget, and we're trying to forge the compromise that will get it done.
Sounds like it's going okay to me. Again, Mr. Speaker, what's your take?
Yeah, I think it's going really well. I think they've solved, I think there were 93 differences. I think they're down to the last 3 or 4. So they've solved 87 out of the 90-some differences initially. And it's just part of the process. The thing is, this isn't the only thing that those members are doing. They're on committees. They got their own bills. They got committee bills, and they're working all those. So it's not like they're meeting round the clock on this. They're meeting during breaks for a half hour, an hour, and so I think they're real close. I think I think it's the last little bit, and we'll wrap it up. I think probably today. You're filming this Thursday. I think we'll wrap it up.
Take us behind the scenes, if you will, just a little bit. When you watch those negotiations, it's maybe hard to understand what's going on when the House voices a position and the Senate says, okay, let us go think about it. And then they come back and then the House says, let us go think about it, rather than kind of being right out there for everyone to see. And I think sometimes people kind of, wish maybe that a little more of it would be in public, so to speak, but maybe it couldn't be efficient that way.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, but I think that it's you don't want to. Each side doesn't want to perceive what they make as a mistake. They have their positions and they're working these It's classic negotiations.
But Mr. Speaker, just with all due respect, this is all the public money that we're talking about, right? Shouldn't it all be transparent?
Oh, I think it is all transparent. I mean, every proposal's made right in front of everybody. It's all live streamed, so anybody can listen to it. But I think proposals and those kind of things, I think they're working on it. They're working on it, and they want to make sure they got it right. That's my take.
I think the speaker's exactly right. The other side of it that enters into it is, it's not like just two people coming together and trying to work something out. People don't understand that there are significant differences between the House and the Senate. The way that the Senate coalesces and feels about certain issues is oftentimes the same, but sometimes dramatically different than what the House does. It doesn't necessarily mean that either side is necessarily right or wrong, but you come to different conclusions you have based on whatever arguments were made or people's life's experience. So, and these folks, as the JAC, the Joint Conference Committee, is trying to work these things out, they're trying to represent all the interests that were voiced and passed the Senate against all those same interests that were voiced and passed in the House. And so it's a process that is a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult than you would have in a typical negotiation.
And what is your relationships with your applicable conference committees? I mean, you are directly involved.
Well, I think
with those choices.
I think to add to what the president said, I think first of all, that's bicameralism, right? And he said it. I mean, they're not just those five representing them. They're five. They're representing, and the rules are you have to stay between the positions of each body, and so that's part of this, to try to what's allowable to actually negotiate. So as far as our involvement, I can speak for myself. Really, it's more about updates, kind of updates, and this is where we think this is going, and keep working at it. So,
fascinating discussion in the House Wednesday afternoon, about things that might allow it to be easier for people to serve. You've talked about per diem rates in both bodies. Even child care support came up in the House yesterday, Mr. Speaker. And what are your thoughts on making it maybe easier in many regards for more people to consider running for public office? Does the legislature need to maybe provide some more support for folks that are considering running?
And I think it's a good question. I think Wyoming, we're probably the leanest operation in the country. There's no doubt. As far as our legislative branch, we took the biggest percentage cuts during the downturn. We took 16% cuts. Executive branch was about 12%, and so we've done all that and tried to do it as lean and set the example for that. And but this ongoing debate is, it's going to continue, and I think we're in probably a world where it's everything is more and more and more and more, and I think it's about who can serve in Wyoming now, and so that was an amendment that was brought to this bill was sent to our Rules Committee, passed the rules, didn't pass the body, and but I think that amendment was more about trying to send a signal that we're moving in that direction. We're trying to, but wasn't successful at this time. So, but I think that is the message that the president and I want to send. Every group I talk to, I tell people to get involved. If you want to do this, run for office. Wyoming's probably the last place you can do that and not have a bunch of wealth and those kind of things. You get out and actually knock on doors, you can make a difference.
Mr. President, how important is it to maybe provide more support in the future for some candidates that maybe fiscally just can't get it to level to run?
I think people need to. I think it's important if we're going to be a citizen legislature and do this. It's not necessarily. I don't know anybody that does this for the pay. And in fact, most of us, it costs us money to come and to serve. And therein lies part of the problem, is that if every time that you take a trip to attend a committee meeting or to attend to legislative duties, that you can't cover your expenses with what per diem or other things that you have, it limits who can serve. Not everybody's in a position to take time off from work or to actually have to pay because the mileage maybe doesn't cover everything, or the per diem certainly doesn't cover enough to cover hotels in every town in this state, and so you come out of pocket. And so if we're going to have people who are, particularly young people, who have children, who are in the battle that they're going to be represented in any way in the legislature, we have to find something for them so that they can serve. It's not necessarily through compensation, but you certainly could maybe help with, you could help with the per diem, you could help with other things. For example, there's one to bring legislators under workers' comp. Right now, we drive all over the state all the time in our own vehicles. We run off the road and don't make it home, we get a tip of the cap, but that's it. There's no money to pay for funerals. There's no money to do anything else. And even worse, if you're injured,
Sure.
It's on your health insurance or non-health insurance is going to cover or not cover it. But there's no disability. There's no support for people to do that. And if you're going to ask young families to send their moms or their dads down here to serve, it seems that maybe we ought to at least put a little bit of the same safety net we provide for other workers in the state.
We spoke earlier in the show with Senator Coe and Representative Northrup, the chairman of the joint education committees in their respective bodies. And a lot of discussion in this legislature about what the future basket of goods is going to be for Wyoming students. And what has been very interesting to me is we're told often that Wyoming has a great top 10 education system. But then we read things like what the superintendent wrote earlier in an editorial that appeared in many Wyoming papers, that we're not preparing our kids for the college and the military and whatever else they want to do. And what is your take on this process as we're going forward with recalibration? Do we need to re-examine the basket of goods now? Should we do that first before we recalibrate? What's going through your mind about that process, Mr.
Yeah, I
Speaker?
think, I respectfully disagree with the superintendent, and I actually work in a modern high school and see the things that are going on. And I think, what's our mission? I mean, is this, and nobody's really said what they want this to look like. And when you say things like that, is that true? I don't think it is. And I think, there's a wide variety of customers in our schools. And, this week in Cheyenne, I went and listened to poetry out loud. Kids from all over the state. Is that part of the modern basket? I think it's important for those kids. I mean, we're teaching coding and computer science. We've got auto mechanics. We're preparing welders, all those things. But I think more importantly, you're giving kids some skill sets that they can keep learning the rest of their life, because their jobs are going to keep changing. I think what we've experienced in our lifetime is going to be much different. And so I think, I think some of that stuff it's frankly distracting. And I think we want to focus on, number one, you got to have good quality teachers in front of these kids, and you got to make sure that, and it's a continual process. It's never over. And we continually analyze the basket of goods. It's in our statute that we have to analyze those, and we go through the standards. Each year, a different subject matter is going through the standards, K through 12. So I think it's I guess I'm a little confused. I haven't heard any of that until this session started. And so the answer is yes, we continually look at that, and we will continue to look at that. And then, and figure out the best way that we can provide an equitable education across this state to all these little towns and big towns, and it's a pretty wide mix, so it's quite a challenge.
We're always looking at ways to improve education, and so I'm never afraid to look at anything. The best of our kids that graduate and coming out of our schools, the best of our kids compete with anybody in the country, no question about it. The other side is, what about the kids that aren't the best of our kids? How do we help those who need a little bit more help? That don't come with home support, that don't do those things. We always want to look at that. The other thing I would say is I've had a number of actual teachers, educators from my community come to me, and we've talked about the basket of goods. They think that the basket of goods is a little bit too big. They think that they can't, that there's too much going on. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what I'm hearing from some people. Other people, like the speaker, think the basket of goods is where it should be. But that's what a democratic society is all about. We have these discussions, we work through them, and we figure it out.
Well, again, I appreciate your time. Thank you to you both. We'll look forward to wrapping it up next week in our final episode of Capital Outlook. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
I've enjoyed our weekly conversations.
Yeah.
We're not done. We may have more to talk about next week, too.
Oh, there's another week? Oh, okay.
We move on to visit with Senator Brian Boner and his work with the Senate Ag Committee and the Joint Ag Committee and its work with the University of Wyoming. Stay with us. And we continue on with Capital Outlook with Senator Brian Boner from Converse County, from Douglas, a sixth-generation farmer and rancher. Senator Boner, welcome. You are chairman of the Senate's Agricultural, State, Public Lands, and Water Resources Committee. And I want to start today's discussion about one of the primary focuses of your work in the interim, and that's with the College of Agriculture at the University of Wyoming. The Laramie Boomerang reported earlier that that your work was to assert greater influence over the programming and funding for the University of Wyoming's College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and that the committee had expressed frustration over recent events at the college. And I want to give you the opportunity to expand on that and what you've accomplished really in the interim here.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Craig.
You're
It's
welcome.
great to be back on. And so what we did with the College of Agriculture, our first mission, I guess you could say, was to sort of ascertain just how much the college got hit during the recent budget reductions at the university compared to the rest of the university. And it took us a while to get some good information.
And what did you learn?
Well, we found that when it comes to personnel, that was the first indication we had, was the reductions in personnel. What we heard was that the university cut about 4% of their workforce, and that equated, or their positions, I should say, that equated to about 17% in the College of Agriculture. So you see this massively disproportionate cut in positions, and it was even worse in the extension service.
Was that due more to just the attrition programs, that they were older, that there's more natural turnover, or some assessed that it was politically motivated? What did you decide?
Well, at the end of the day, I think it's almost irrelevant that what happened, and whether it was due to them just not paying attention or whether it was intentional, the results were the same. So, I kind of make the point that I learned as a 20-year-old university ROTC cadet at the University of Wyoming, that when you make a decision, you have to go back and assess the effects of that decision. And unfortunately, that just didn't happen. So I think that what the university has suffered from overall, the College of Ag has suffered from more significantly when it comes to turnover in the dean's office. And so I think that it's important to have that communication from the college to the Old Main to make sure that these sort of mistakes don't happen again. This is a land grant function of the university. This is why the university exists. It's for engineering, it's for agriculture, it's for military studies, it's for ROTC. So it's important that we shift the focus of the university back onto the core of their academic mission. Especially as we have limited resources, we're going to have to start making tough choices, including at the university. They've already made some tough choices, but we have to navigate those difficult decisions in a way that represents the interests of the state and represents the mission of the university.
They've hired a new dean. She came on this summer, Dean Barbara Roscoe.
Yes.
What's her vision moving forward, and have you had conversations?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we're very excited about Dean Roscoe. The focus right now is just building back up the capabilities that the college lost over the past few years. So we've been doing that in the budget. For example, there's $4 million within the university's budget earmarked for professorships, endowed professorships within the College of Agriculture to begin to rebuild those academic programs, which should be the focus of the legislature and the university overall.
So have you learned that this really has had an impact on Wyoming farmers and producers and ranchers?
Yeah, I think there's lots of room for improvement in the way that the university supports our farmers and ranchers, not just through providing good, solid graduates that are ready to go into the workforce, but also through the extension service. As I kind of alluded to, they took a 41% reduction in their personnel. That's 10 times what the university average was. So you see these programs which are supposed to be supporting the rest of the state just being absolutely eviscerated during these cuts, and so that's that's the most alarming thing that we found on the Ag Committee is all of the folks who are supposed to be supporting our constituents directly were, for whatever reason, were treated very poorly.
So the future looks bright in your mind, or there's still even more work to do in the upcoming interim?
Oh, absolutely. We've got to start, but it's going to be a huge shift in the way that we look at the relationship between the legislature and the university. I think that we're moving in the right direction. The Board of Trustees is working on a strategic plan. I think that's going to be doing much better than, frankly, whatever the whims of the legislature have to be in a given year. So
you've mandated now some reports to come back. What are you hoping to learn year by year when you talk about, we're not going to go through their budget line by line, but what is it that you want to start to understand that you haven't previously?
Just overall, what their budget is, their revenues, their expenditures, how they're doing in terms of personnel, how many professors have they hired, how many faculty have they hired, what's it looking like, and just in general, how are they supporting Wyoming agriculture? It's our number 3 industry, and that at the end of the day, that's the goal.
I chuckle a little bit, but I think it makes sense in the context of this discussion. You got a flyer from the university at your meeting in Sheridan that said essentially that the University of Wyoming will not be viewed as successful unless the College of Ag is wildly successful.
Right, they're working hard to get back up to what I think we all expect of them and what they should frankly expect of themselves. So it's been a rough go the past couple of years, but I'm glad that we got the right people in place and we're beginning to put the resources in place to really focus on their academic mission.
Turn the page a little bit. You live near Douglas, Douglas, sometimes a year when you're not on the ranch. The state fair has been an issue in this legislature to the extent that they have released their master plan recently. One of the parts of that I think has caught some interest is the price tag that will be associated with that. And the comments, at least in your local newspaper, was that it could be $51 million or so, and most of that, your paper said, could come out of state coffers at a time, obviously, when resources are challenged. So what is your vision for the state fair, and how do you think it's progressing today?
Well, I think it's important to look at the recent history first and foremost. We've totally changed the organizational structure, which was very sorely needed. We have a board in place now that has expertise from across the state and buy-in from across the state, whereas before it was a very cumbersome bureaucracy that reported directly to the Department of Agriculture. So I think that's a pretty good model as we look at this new reality of constrained resources in the state government. How do we do things differently? How do we become more nimble, more flexible? And that's been a process with the state fair. So before we just come to the legislature or anybody with our hand out saying, give us more money for buildings, we went through that difficult work of making sure that we had the right people in place and that we had the resources needed to really make the fair successful. So that was the first step. Now that we have the board in place, they've kind of got their feet underneath them. We have a new director, a new deputy director who have lots of energy and want to do the work necessary to really make the fair meet everybody's expectations. Only then have we started looking at what are the facility needs. And it's important to point out that of that $51 million, not all of that is going to be state funds. The majority is, but for example, there's a $12 million roughly for a public-private partnership potentially for a hotel on the fairgrounds. But that's over a span of 10 years. Right. The initial ask would only be about $8 to $10 million. And that's something we could discuss. We've already been in discussion with my local leaders in the city and the county to see what local revenues we could contribute along with state funds, because the community of Douglas absolutely would benefit from new facilities that would increase revenue to the state, but also bring people in from outside of Douglas, outside of the state even potentially, and get them to those fairgrounds. That's going to benefit the community as well. So we're looking for those win-win situations, and part of that means also that there's equal investment from both local and state resources.
You argued on the floor of the Senate that county fairs face different challenges than the state fair, that they really are almost apples and oranges, is what I took from what you were talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and you just look at, for example, and we're trying to get away from this, but even $200 contract for a judge would have to get 5 different seals of approval here in Cheyenne before you could actually get that contract for a very small, very small amount. The interim director actually had to he had to write a personal check to one of the night shows to get them to come because the bureaucracy in Cheyenne was so slow that we could not get them paid in time. They weren't going to show up. So that's the sort of just the bureaucratic hurdles you have to deal with a state agency that you don't have to deal with your county fair, and that's just one of the challenges. In addition to having the funding source being dependent upon folks who are not from that area and maybe don't always understand the significance of the fair to our rural communities.
I will tell our viewers, if they haven't seen the master plan, it's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's good opportunities there. We have an opportunity to have a very competitive equine center that would, the closest, I guess, competing facility would be on the Front Range in northern Colorado. So that's kind of that initial $8 million focus would be to really upgrade those facilities and bring people in from all over the state and from throughout the region, really, to come to Douglas to compete in equine-related events. So that's absolutely one of the most significant opportunities that would raise the most revenue and bring the most people in from out of state.
On now to healthcare, and I ask it in the context of Douglas seems to have maybe gotten it right relative to how it manages its healthcare, and I know it's not necessarily a state government reasons for that, but certainly you can argue they've done well. What can the rest of the state learn from how your community has managed what it has available for its citizens relative to healthcare?
Well, I think we have a great team at our hospital. They're a highly motivated group. That they get out there. They're competitive. They don't just accept the fact that everybody's going to go down the interstate to Casper. And so I think it all comes down to the people working in those facilities and who are going to advocate for what they do within the community. And they have a good board of good people that care about the future of the hospital, and they get out and the community supports them. And that's not easy to do, to raise funds for health care when people are already paying so much for their health care, but they do it. They've been able to upgrade their emergency room recently based off of fundraising efforts. So yeah, they're doing a great job. It's tough living in a boom and bust economy. Everybody thinks that the boom is great, but it's really tough in finding people to work at those facilities.
Housing for those people?
Absolutely. There's housing issues. It's we recently moved out of our house in Douglas, and just as we were moving, we were getting people calling us, say, "Hey, can we rent your house?" and
not a bad problem to have on your side.
Right? No, but it
shows the issue.
But it shows absolutely when you have those transient workforce, the rental market is absolutely insane. So that's something like the hospital is especially has to deal with. Is you have folks coming in from out of town, out of state. Where are they going to live when nobody quite wants to make that leap to build new buildings when you never know when the boom's going to go bust?
We're 3 weeks down the road since the governor announced the possibility of the state looking to purchase the 1 million acres of land along the Transcontinental Railroad corridor. And we've been giving legislators the opportunity to comment about their thoughts about that. What are you thinking about today now? After you probably have heard from constituents, you've maybe learned more about the potential or the pitfalls of the project. What's been on your mind about that?
Well, I think I acknowledge all the concerns are very well taken. I think it's an excellent opportunity. We have to pursue it. We have to at least see what the possibilities may be. It's going to come down to its potential to generate revenue for the state, the potential to diversify our investments, and as well as the risks associated with taking on that amount of land. And that's, as the chairman of the committee that oversees our state lands office, that's a huge question I have is how are we going to manage that additional 1 million surface acres, 4 million mineral acres? That's going to be a challenge that has to be addressed. It's absolutely something that we can address. It's possible, but it's something we have to be keenly interested in and just very aware of the challenges associated with that opportunity. So like anything with life, nothing comes for free. There's going to be challenges associated with such a tremendous opportunity, but I'm confident that we're up to the task if the details of the deal are favorable for the state of Wyoming.
Yeah, very interesting interim and summertime to understand that for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Lastly, Senator, while you're here, you heard Senator Rand Paul speak when he came to the Capitol. And he talked about restricting troop deployments. One of your House colleagues is very much in favor of legislation that would prevent the Wyoming National Guard troops from serving in wars that haven't been declared, and you're a former Air Force officer. What were you thinking when you were hearing that discussion?
Well, it's important to get our facts straight on this matter. Congress has authorized the use of military force, two of which are still valid, and we can argue whether they use the exact words "declare war" or not, and whether that's constitutional. Clearly, it is. I mean, the idea that we've been at war for 20 years under unconstitutional means is absurd. So, as far as the actual bill itself goes, I don't think it's constitutional. If you look at Perkins versus DOD, was a Supreme Court case in 1990 where the governor of Minnesota actually tried to do this very thing. And the U.S. Supreme Court says you cannot withhold your National Guard from federal activation. So it's already been decided by the courts. So it's meant to end the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, which I'm for if we do so responsibly. That's part of, as being a nuclear launch officer for 6 years, you lose your naive. You're no longer naive after you have that experience. And so I'm all for bringing our troops home, but we have to do so in a responsible way that ensures that we're not just going to go back there a few years later when we have an organization like ISIS pop up in that vacuum that we've created if we pull out without there being a stable government in place.
Are you getting your rest at night, Senator? You're a new father recently. Are things working out well?
Yeah, my wife's a saint. That's all I'm going to say. She's pretty good about taking care of the kids when I get home. Like at 7 or 8 o'clock at night during the session, and everything's great. It's awesome to have them here in Cheyenne with me, and life is good right now.
Congratulations for
Thanks,
that.
appreciate it.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for joining us on this segment of Capital Outlook.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And as we wrap up our 4th week of Capital Outlook, we're going to take you to western Wyoming, to beautiful Star Valley. Senator Dan Dockstader is our Capital Outlook profile this week. That's next. Stay with us. Senator Dan Dockstader, the Majority Floor Leader of the Wyoming Senate, welcome to this Capital Outlook profile.
Thank you. Welcome to Star Valley.
Oh, it's beautiful here. We have a beautiful view. We're at your home. Thank you so much for hosting us. Why did you come to Star Valley, and when did you come?
Back in '85, we answered a call to a newspaper. They had the old-fashioned classified ads in the newspaper. My wife picked it up, and it was a Boise paper saying that 2 gentlemen had a newspaper in Wyoming they wanted managed. And my wife brought that home, and we thought maybe it was Jackson because that's where the people were. They had bought the Star Valley paper. We interviewed with them, and they said, well, we're what we want to have. We want you down there in Star Valley and running the paper for us. My wife was a graphic artist. I'd written stories for a daily newspaper. My degree's in broadcast journalism, and it was just a good fit. And so we moved to Star Valley as a young 20-something couple and 1 little baby girl and took over the Star Valley paper. And that was a long time ago, 34, 35 years ago now. It's been a while, and we're still putting out a paper, but we're doing a lot more than that.
And you are doing a lot more. You've really evolved, not only with medium and technology, but you're involved with radio, you're involved with broadcast streaming, video, and certainly the print edition. Has that been fun for you?
It's exciting. It's exciting to get up and go to work. I hosted a morning radio show here for about 20 years and eventually bought the radio station. And so we combined staffs. In a small market like this, you have to do it financially to make it work, overlap staff. So everybody that works at the paper works at the radio or vice versa. But we do much more. We do live streaming too. So we completely reinvented it, brought our little staff around the table, and I said, okay, we've got radio stations now, we've got a newspaper, we've got a website, and we're starting to live stream. And how do we do this with the idea that just because it's a rural environment, we don't have to think small?
But it's all about developing and helping community, right? That's why you do what you do.
That's the drive. Obviously, you don't make a lot of money in this in a rural environment. We have a passion for Star Valley. Our little staff has a passion for Star Valley. And we said, first of all, how can we make it shine for Star Valley? How can we make it like no one else is doing it? Like our hospital, our communication center, our power and light. How can we do it entirely different? And we do that. Our staff meetings are energized. They're exciting. When we decide that we're going to go out and do this game and that game, that's what we do. Are we going to do this broadcast here for radio? We've got a morning radio show on our radio stations that reach into Bridger Valley, Kemmer, Diamondville, Star Valley, that are ranked number 2 in quality. our sports broadcasting ranked #1 in the state by the Association of Broadcasters.
We watched you read the news this morning in that morning show, and you write, you broadcast, you do camera. I'm only going to let you do one thing. What are you going to pick?
Oh, not fair. I enjoy all of it. My editor for the paper, she says, I'm behind with this or that. Would you do this story and that story? I enjoy sitting down and putting out a good old-fashioned print product, a print story, and taking the photo that goes with that story. I thoroughly enjoy getting on the air with the radio. I do 13 broadcasts a day. I start at 4 a.m. and if I'm going to be gone, then I'll record them that go throughout the day. But if I'm going to be there, I'll do them live, like what you saw this morning. Video photography is fascinating. You can do so much now with digital photography.
Hard to pick.
I can't pick one.
Senator, I want to talk about your service because it strikes me, especially now that you're in leadership. We're in Star Valley. We're a long way away from Cheyenne. You spend an awful lot of time away from home serving. How difficult is that?
It is difficult. Last night I got in at 11 o'clock from Cheyenne. We'd been meeting with the Public Service Commission. Took my county commissioners over there. We got in the old Suburban, drove over, met with the Public Service Commission throughout the day, met with the governor before we left town, 7 hours back. I finally just settled in that that's the way it is. That's where we live. But I didn't want to make the fact that we live out west cause any problems for me in service. So I spend a lot of time on the road. I choose to go to a lot of meetings at my own time or expense just to be involved. And I think it's more important that we say to the rest of the state, we are Wyoming. And so I will travel to those meetings and be a part of their meetings to say, yes, we're part of Wyoming.
I kid with some friends who we have here in Star Valley. It's Wyoming, Star Valley, and Idaho.
Yeah.
Star Valley sometimes is its own little independent, separate place, it seems to me.
But we want to be Wyoming. One of the first things we did with the radio stations when we acquired them, we put Wyoming sports on, University of Wyoming football games, University of Wyoming basketball games. That was one of the first things we did, is brought Wyoming to this valley, and the same.
So we look over the valley, and I don't know if our cameras show this very well on this beautiful day, but we're looking south. There can't be any problems here. But of course there are challenges that the valley has. What are they?
It is. It's a rural economy. We tend to be tied in with Jackson's economy somewhat. We send 1,000+ people up. We call it the Canyon Commute, the Jackson 500, to work in Jackson. So these are families that they have to leave their home for the day. That's a challenge. I wish we had a stronger economy. We're working on that. We're constantly on the road looking for solutions, talking to companies, saying we have high tech, we have gigabit internet speeds. We have the lowest rates, the power rates in the nation with Lower Valley. And we were rated 2 weeks ago, lowest in the nation for power rates. We've got great health care, high-tech health care. And so that's what we're working on, is recruitment. Governor Meade came a couple of years ago. We held a conference in Alpine at the new Alpine Airport. We'd ran some vertical takeoff and landing legislation, VTOLs. We brought companies in from across the nation who said, we asked them, can you consider a place like this to do business? We took them and showed them Aviat aircraft, that we have an aviation certificate. This is a place you can consider those. We're continually trying. We're not backing down.
Besides the work that you've done with the coal workers in Kemmerer, what else are your constituents now asking you to help them with, or to help Wyoming with?
On the north end of my county, it's a conservative base. They're not interested in new taxes. South end of the county, which technically the coal operations are just outside of my district, but I'm working for them 24/7 regardless. So it's kind of a mixed figure. The north end says, be conservative, be fiscally conservative. Going to try to do that, continue that. Walk away with balanced budgets like I noted. The south end, I'm not going to give up on those folks, keeping them employed in some form or fashion.
We hear often still the need to diversify our economy and diversify our tax structure. What does diversify our tax structure mean to you?
Before we do that, we have to address the deficit spending we're doing with education. The reserve account is taking care of that now. I don't want to step back in the quality education that we have across the state. Superintendent Balo is doing a wonderful job. We've got good schools across the state. But I think we can funnel the money that we use in education, use it in a different way. And I hope to come together with leadership on in both the House and the Senate. We've got a few ideas. We're going to sit down at the table and say, you know, maybe we ought to position dedicated funds to education with the existing funds we use. And we still haven't taken that deep dive into how we're spending that education dollar out there. We've done some, but there's more. There's more to
More work coming up.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of extra time, but if you do, is your work your hobby because it's so interesting and diverse, or do you have other hobbies too?
Actually, I was talking with Representative Larson over in Fremont County the other day, and I said, isn't it interesting? And he agreed, and he said, 80-20, Dan. I said 80-20. I said, meaning the old job, it used to be the old job, the day job was 80%, 20% legislature. And we both readily agreed. Now legislature is now taking 80% of the time, and the regular job is 20%. Well, we're fortunate we have great people like you've met here that keep our businesses running. My wife keeps the business running while I head off to Cheyenne, and I text my wife, and it's a strange thing when you text your wife from Star Valley and say, I'm home in Cheyenne tonight. And she understands. Cheyenne's a big, big part of our lives. We spend a lot of time traveling back and forth to there. I just came home from there last night. But it's very consuming. So there's very little recreational time. But as you can see, we're completely surrounded by national forests here. Bridger Teton National Forest there behind us. Caribou Targhee National Forest over there. We have endless backcountry to play in. I do a lot of hiking. I like to walk over the Salt River Mountain Range where you can see the Wind Rivers at the top, the Grand Tetons at the top, and go down and have somebody pick me up or leave a motorcycle down there. Do a little bit of motorcycling in the backcountry. Broke a leg over here in the Caribou Targhee a few years ago, right in front of the Republican convention in Florida. So I had to take a cane to the convention because I had a broken leg.
A little motorcycle mishap?
Yeah, a little motorcycle mishap.
Uh-oh.
I like to ride a Harley at night. I got a Harley that I take up and down this beautiful valley at night. Just like to walk. I kind of getting back into mountain climbing, got to lose a little more weight. Took a shot at the Grand Teton, got snowed out about halfway up, so I got to go back and get that hill.
Have you summited once before?
No, I want to go, so I got to go back and get it. Gannett, over in the winds, we're going to go get that next summer and get that taken care of. So I like to walk with a pair of hiking sticks, like to ride a motorcycle in the mountains, like to ride a motorcycle on the highway, a Harley, and I love my grandchildren when I can spend time with them.
And you have?
We have 12 now, yeah.
With 4 children?
Yeah.
And your wife is an art and English teacher at Star Valley High School?
Yeah. She says somebody has to make the living while I go play politics.
Well, just before we started shooting this morning, there was fog in the area. It's all burned off now. You had a rainbow that started right in your field out here. This valley really is almost a pot of gold for Wyoming.
We love this valley.
If people haven't seen it, if people haven't come over to Star Valley.
This is a treasure over here.
It really is. It really is.
It's 12 communities, but you won't hear people say I'm from a specific community. They just say I'm from Star Valley.
Well, Senator Dan Dockstader, the majority floor leader of the Wyoming Senate, it's been a pleasure to visit with you, and thank you again for having us at your beautiful home.
Thanks for coming to Star Valley.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
By a grant from AARP, serving the needs and providing real possibilities for the over 50 population in Wyoming. AARP Wyoming. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And by Wyoming Humanities, celebrating our heritage, strengthening our democracy, and growing Wyoming's creative and cultural economy for over 50 years. Visit thinkwy.org.